Outsiders. Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to woke virtue signalling and identity politics. What today's young students are to enriching the proud history of Western civilization and advancing the extraordinary academic and intellectual achievements of the Enlightenment.
We're here at UMass's campus supporting the students in their encampment. They're demanding for divestment from war profiteers and warmongers. I'm here with Yafa, who just spoke to the students in like the most inspiring, beautiful way, and I think really rejuvenated the crowd.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be out here. If you're able to come out, come out. If you're not in Massachusetts or Western Massachusetts, go out to an encampment near you. Students all around are starting these encampments everywhere. Feel free to show up, or not feel free, definitely show up.
Right, yes, sir. I think we might give that one a miss. Thanks all the same. Funny, we just learnt last night that the latest research shows IQ levels are plunging in the US for the first time ever. Wonder whatever gave them that idea. We've got a huge show coming up for you today, and you do not want to miss 1 second of it. We'll be chatting to the great Ian Plimer about the latest insane climate change plan to pump carbon dioxide into the great Artesian Basin. What could possibly go wrong? Plenty, as it turns out. We'll be chatting to Senator Claire Chandler, one of my faves in the coalition, Army Horowitz, later in the show, about the insanity on US campuses. We've got a lot to say about that. And we'll go to London shortly to chat about the devastating result for the Tories in the council elections last night with Esther Kraku. We've got the Canberra Clown Show, Lefty Lunacy, and we might even have a few opinions thrown in. Can't wait. This is the Opinion Show. But first, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. So let's have a look at some of our own brilliant students here in Australia.
These are not just words. These are realities that some amongst us here today on campus are facing daily. We find ourselves at a crucial moment where our response to these challenges will define us. We're here because we're appalled by the vicious anti-Jewish racism that has been promoted under the guise of political statements and free speech against Israel.
That, I'm pleased to say, was the pro-Israel protest, the anti-pro-Palestine protest that happened at Sydney Uni. Now, what's been happening at Sydney, Rita and James, is been pretty appalling. It was good to see people there on Friday who are actually standing up pro-Israel and actually speaking out against some of the madness. Some of the madness, have a clip of this person talking to the ABC about their fondness for Palestine.
I actually say that Hamas deserve our unconditional support, not because I agree with their strategy. Absolutely.
You can't condemn what Hamas did in October last year?
I will not condemn what Hamas did. We must be unconditional, but we must be critical also,
Luke?
right?
No, I did not condemn.
So, I mean, they came in, there was so many people got killed, innocent people got killed, babies got killed, people are still being held hostage.
Well, that's actually, like, the thing about babies being killed and, like, the numbers are quite false, right? There's been a lot of misinformation spread around about who killed who, right? And actually, like, there's a lot of evidence to say that Israel and the IDF themselves actually also did murder a lot of their own people.
Unbelievable. Rita?
Yeah, these are the leaders of the movement at one of the universities. So you heard two voices there, apart from the ABC interviewer, both saying they will not be critical of Hamas. I mean, what does Hamas need to do for these absolute simpletons, these amoral simpletons, to be critical of them? I mean, how much more gruesome, cruel, horrific must their violence be to get condemnation or something other than unconditional support? I mean, that to me is astonishing. But, and this is somewhere where we might disagree, and I certainly disagree with many within the Liberal Party, I do not want to trample on the free speech rights of anybody, including the people I vehemently disagree with. I'd rather hear that and know where the minds of these students are, just how extreme some of them are, how fringe-dwelling some of them are, rather than have it hidden because they are worried they're going to be charged with a hate crime. I think we've got enough laws policing speech in this country.
But the issue with that interview was not that it might constitute a hate crime. It surely comes very close to constituting support for a terrorist organisation. Hamas is a listed terrorist organisation. They're saying not only we don't condemn what they did, but we actually support it. Interestingly, the ANU have said those students will be disciplined, but the university has declined to say what that discipline will be. And I think this is the problem that our universities have got. We know how this ends. It ends about 4 weeks from now with riot police having to go in and spray tear gas and remove students. We've seen it in the US, so I don't understand why our university vice-chancellors, seeing the start of it here in Australia, don't nip it in the bud and deal strongly with these students. They've got a right to protest.
Well, they've come out and
they've got a right to encamp on the lawns and
they've come out and said the
trespass.
opposite. So the group of 8, who are the main 8 universities, Monash, University of New South Wales, Sydney, etc., University of Melbourne, the vice-chancellors of all those have come out and said, oh, no, this is just free speech, nothing more to see here. Now, to Rita's point, no one wants to stifle free speech 100%, and absolutely, we need to hear what these individuals are saying. But for me, Rita, there must be consequences. It's not up to the universities to impose the consequences. It's up to employers and donors to the universities.
Yes.
I would not employ a single one of those characters who are parading up and down support for Hamas, support for this and that. Hamas, as Rita is saying, are the most vile murderers we've seen in this century. So, no, the consequences must come further down the track. It must come, if you want to go and demonstrate, show your support for Hamas and the terrorists of the Palestinian Authority, then do so knowing that you won't get a job further down the track. That is where the consequences should be, Rita.
Well, those consequences are organic, and I'm all for that. And if I was an employer, I would be very hesitant to hire any sort of activist, because I think it comes with a great deal of trouble in the workplace.
Of risk, absolutely.
Not just this lot, a lot of other activists as well. But the universities, I think part of the reason we've seen this in the US and here, why the heads of the universities are reluctant to condemn what they're seeing on their campuses, where certainly Jewish students do not feel safe, they don't feel welcome, is because they know their academics, the administration is pretty much on board with this, largely on board with this. And that's we saw in Colombia, scores of academics and administrative staff form human shields around the students to stop the police from getting to them. We've seen, and this is one of the great things about X, or Twitter as it was used to be called, is so many academics are online sharing their opinions. So you can see for yourself in their own words just how far left radical they are. So it's no surprise we're seeing what we're seeing in universities. We've been indoctrinating these kids in this poisonous thinking for decades now. The ones who are at university now have heard it from prep all the way through to higher education. Are we surprised they hate the country? Are we surprised they hate the West? Are we surprised they've got this Marxist frame where they look at everything through the oppressor and oppressed? No, this is what they've been taught. And sadly, too many parents haven't been strong enough to stand up to it, because
what's happening in the schools. Parents have to know what's going on, James. The footage we showed right at the beginning there was of a pro-Israel, so people saying, stop the hate at university. Finally, there was a march, and there was a well-attended march at Sydney University, and that's a good thing. It was peaceful. Yeah. There were people saying, stop this hate within the universities, whether it is effective or not. But it's critical that we have that side of the debate as well. But I would like to see those same people who are donors to these universities start saying to, and Rita mentioned the parents, there are parents and donors, start saying to the universities, that's fine if you're going to tolerate free speech like this, but you've got to get into these lessons in these classes, and we've got to start cleaning out this vile anti-Semitic stuff that is being taught by teachers.
Well, that's what I mean, in the sense that we see where this goes. So again, I can't understand why vice-chancellors don't realise this does end in your funding being cut, because that's what's happening with major donors in the US.
They'll understand it when the funding is cut, so it's up to donors out there to start cutting that funding.
But most of their funding comes directly from us, the taxpayer, and also from overseas students. So they know this isn't an enormous threat to their funding. It's a little bit different here.
And therefore, the government needs to start putting in place, if we get a change of government, which we desperately need, we need to start seeing the Liberals coming up with some firm ideas to clean out the Marxism within our universities, or simply to start funding new universities, which will turn out people who will be productive citizens. I agree with you. We don't want to see us... Well, there are better universities out there, and they can be set up, and people should start sending their kids to those. Let's talk about Albo's discovered a new type of person, a trot. Albo...
Is he looking in the mirror?
All the trots. I thought Albo was a trot. He was a trot at university. He was a communist or a communist sympathiser at university. He met up with a group of members of the Jewish community yesterday to sort of say, oh, no, it's all going to be OK. I noticed he had Allegra Spender there, but she who was supporting more money going back to Hamas, she was happy to turn up there at the Central Synagogue. I wonder if anybody pointed out to her that maybe, more funding to UNRWA, rather, which ends up with Hamas, is not a great idea. But Kelly Sloan, who we've had on here, was disinvited, apparently.
What?
Apparently, that's the story that's
Well, you know
there.
what? I thought actually his comments were very perceptive, and he's 100% right. A lot of these activists are the same activists you see for every environmental protest, for anti-Australia Day protest, BLM, whatever the cause, the leftist Marxist cause is, they're there. So, and if you want to dismiss them as trots, then good on you, Albo. But, this is a man who is in his 50s, was bragging about fighting Tories. So I don't know if he's in a position to be dismissive of this lot. He seems to be a bit of a student protest as an adult. But it is what they are. And I think they've just had such free rein. This is the problem. It's the academics who I almost see as bigger problem as these kids. In fact, not as a bigger problem, because they're the ones who are spreading this. They're the ones who are tolerating it, emboldening it, enabling it, sometimes rewarding it.
Well, we've got a bit coming up later in the show where we'll look at some of those academics in America who are actively parading out there, saying we're the academics, we're the faculty, we're supporting Hamas, we're supporting pro-Palestinian. But in the same breath that Albo's saying, oh, it's just all the trots who are doing all this, out comes Labor with more funding for those trots. They're going to give $3 billion of your taxpayers' dollars to reduce the HEX fees or whatever it is. They're copying the Biden playbook.
Yes.
Let's go and just bribe our way into these very same trots who are permeating our universities. James, what do you make of this?
Well, they're saying they're going to wipe $3 billion of student debt. But debt doesn't just disappear. It doesn't get wiped. It gets paid for by somebody.
By us.
And we will be the mugs paying for these students to be better off. So they're going to tie the indexation rather than to CPI to the wage growth, whichever is lower. So that's how it's going to work. I think for a student with $50,000 worth of debt, it's about $2,500 in savings. They're doing a Stephen Miles. He's just handed out cheques for $1,000 to everybody right before an election. Elbow is going to win the votes of young people by paying them off.
But it's deeply sinister, actually, Rita, the way they've done it in the States and the way that they're basically saying we are financing the people in these universities who are hardcore left-wingers, who support us come what may, most of whom are too stupid to even know what they're supporting. There's a deeply sinister tone to all this, Rita.
And it's a transfer of wealth from people who are working to people who are the privileged to go to university and graduate. So you look at the socioeconomic factors there, it really is transferring some wealth from working people to the privileged classes. And that's certainly the experience in the US when you look at the demographics of who benefits from this. But this goes to a bigger issue. We've got too many kids at universities doing junk degrees. They're being sold false hope. They're leaving university with a big debt. Some of that never gets paid back. We pick up the bill. And it doesn't actually help them achieve anything in terms of meaningful employment. Their job that they end up doing bears no relation to the degree. And this costs us money. It's just been accepted, and it's almost like a badge of honour that, oh, we've got more kids finishing university. Well, yeah, it's fantastic if they're becoming doctors and architects and actually doing something useful with those degrees. But the number of junk arts degrees and other disciplines.
And
We've
they
got to
go
rein it in.
straight into the
Rein
ABC
it
or
in.
straight into staffers for the Labor Party or even the Liberal Party, heaven help us.
Or you can become Prime Minister.
That's right, exactly. But talk about throwing your money around. Another $1 billion went this week to support. This is Albo's Future Made in Australia. $1 billion of your money goes to quantum physics computing. Now, we've had quantum physics computing people on this show before. Michelle Simon, she's been on here. It's a big potentially future industry, but it ain't there yet. And nobody's got there yet. But Ed Husick has decided he can give $1 billion of your money. He's picked the winner. I didn't know Ed had all this knowledge of quantum physics, Rita. But you point out the Financial Review disagree that this is the best way forward.
Well, yeah, they're saying that it's going to add to the inflationary pressures, but it's just the entire premise of it is so wrong, but they've been very clever. They've given it a name with those magic words, Made in Australia, because we all love Made in Australia. So people who sort of just look at the headline here would go, well, this is a good policy. This is going to see more manufacturing in Australia, more jobs in Australia. But no, the amount of taxpayer largesse that's going into this, it's just not... I just don't think it passes the pub test. And people, you look at the detail of this, there's massive questions to be asked. There's massive questions to be asked about the selection process. Why this project as opposed to 3 others?
Well, exact. Governments can't pick winners, so your money may well go down the drain. Who knows? James, the face of Ninette Simons should be the face of Labor's legacy. This is the poor woman who was bashed allegedly by one of the detainees who was let out by the Labor government, Claire O'Neill, Andrew Giles, Mark Dreyfus. I'll be talking about this later in Appropriately Clown Show. But James, this is a horrible story. As we said, it's the alleged perpetrator of this crime was one of those let out by the Albanese government. Yeah,
it's a shocking story. And I mean, to see what that woman has endured, and not just the injuries, but the ongoing trauma that she will experience from that, no doubt. The big takeaway from me in this is if you're looking for job security, get a role as a government minister with Anthony Albanese. You will never lose your job. You can have
no matter how badly you
stuff up. You will never be removed. Giles and O'Neill have just been shocking in that role. And every time they make a mistake, Anthony Albanese just disappears them for a couple of days, waits till the news cycle moves on, and then he brings them back until they make another mistake. So if you want job security, get a job in the cabinet with Anthony Albanese. You'll never be removed. Well,
and Chris Bowen is one of your stars. Then, and this is... incredible to have the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, admit that it was his own delegate that signed off on the removal of the ankle bracelet for the man allegedly responsible for that heinous attack. So that in itself, you would think that would be the deal breaker. That would be, OK, we've stuffed up consistently, but this is one stuff up that we can't get past. But no, that's just another update.
Another day in the Canberra Clown Show. James, one person who can get rid of those Albanese mob is, of course, you, the voters out there, and you can do that at the next election. Best way to toss a lot of them out. Let's talk to Esther Kraku now in London. It's been an extraordinary night there with local council elections in which all sorts of characters won. Esther, great to see you. What did you make? First of all, I'm going to play you a clip of one of the characters who won last night. He's wandering around shouting Allahu Akbar. I didn't know that was how you got into local council in Britain, but apparently it is. Let's have a look at this guy.
We will not be silent. We will raise the voice of Gaza. We will raise the voice of Palestine. Allahu Akbar.
So he's the new councillor for some place or up in the north of England. Esther, tell us what happened overnight.
So overnight, what happened was what many of us expected. The Tories lost spectacularly. They lost hundreds of seats. The Labour Party gained well over 300 seats in the local elections. That clip there you just showed of the newly elected councillor winning and shouting Allahu Akbar and saying that this vote was for Gaza. I'm really curious what he thinks he can do in his position as a local councillor for Gaza. I don't think he understands how the local elections actually work. But what you did notice is actually a shift. So in many areas, many sort of Tory strongholds, the Labour Party actually gained a lot of those councillor seats. But they actually lost a lot of Muslim majority or like areas with significant Muslim communities, and that was mainly over the vote for Gaza. So it's actually showing that in many parts of the country, the split isn't based on actual policy or how, you know, politicians' actions are affecting their lives. They're more symbolic votes, like, you know, territories tens of thousands of miles away from the UK. Unfortunately, you would have seen that Sadiq Khan won his re-election in London, and it's a curious thing as well because, you know, this is someone who's received a lot of criticism for his ULEZ policies, his kind of anti-motorist policies. But the interesting thing isn't actually the spectacular failure by the Tory party to put up basically an unelectable, completely unappealing candidate. It was actually the turnout. So Sadiq Khan won 40% of the vote for 40% of the eligible electorate coming out to vote. So that's 15% of basically all the people that could have voted. And people are really questioning, and I'm sure this is going to be an even bigger conversation at the next election. Do people's votes actually matter? Because here in the UK, we have the first past the post system. You can win sort of many seats in this country with basically about 25 to 30% of the electorate voting for you. And the question is going to become more significant. You're going to have places like parties like Reform that can actually steal the votes from many disillusioned Tory voters, but they get no representation in Parliament. And we're asking many questions like, should we make voting compulsory, like is the case in Australia? Should we have a better political system that ensures more representation? The Tories lost the Birmingham mayoral election, even though Birmingham City Council is in, get this, £1 billion of debt, because the Reform Party stole 30,000 votes from the Tory party, and he actually ended up losing by just over 1,500 votes to the Labour Party. So there are many questions about, you know, the suitability of our political electoral system, whether it's fit for purpose, what's going to happen to people that just don't vote or vote independent, which you're seeing a lot happen in the local councils, but also the uncomfortable question for the Labour Party, all these disillusioned, mainly Muslim voters that are leaving the party, can they afford to take that hit? There are many questions to be asked.
Well, the Telegraph notes that many Muslim voters are voting on different issues from the rest of the electorate. No kidding, Einstein. So, yeah, you might think it's silly that they're voting predominantly on the Palestine issue, but that's how they're voting, and the representation they're receiving is quite significant. Look at the number of mayors across the UK now who are Muslim background in those sorts of electorates. What does this say about the coming general election? Are the Tories going to stick with Rishi Sunak and have certain defeat? Will there be a late-minute change?
Well, I suspect that the Tories are just going to accept that now Rishi Sunak, there's no point in him going anywhere. They just have to accept the oncoming electoral defeat and just, you know, change course as a party overall. This is probably going to be one of the most disastrous election cycles for the Tories in history. I mean, it's the kind of you know, defeats that could really just bring down the whole party entirely. But there's no real point in removing Rishi Sunak now. The damage was done long before he became Prime Minister, and I think the Tories need to look at actually their values and whether they are still a Conservative party in name as well as in practice. But the question is now, actually, how much of kind of a landslide is Labour going to have? Because it's not just the fact that Keir Starmer will almost certainly be the next Prime Minister of the UK. Will there be any sort of opposition to more outlandish policies? We've seen all the ludicrous policies coming out of Scotland, for example, with this sort of gender ID or self-ID legislation, really lax self-ID legislation, having male rapists in female prisons, giving children puberty blockers, which has now basically been overruled thanks to the Cass review. You know, these kinds of policies come out of Scotland because they don't really have any sort of second chamber, any sort of sophisticated power sharing model. But if the Labour Party wins a giant landslide, which many are assuming is going to happen, they're just going to have free reign to do it entirely and do these and implement these kinds of crazy policies. I mean, you see green policies on steroids that were unfortunately jettisoned by the SNP because they realized it was unworkable. What's stopping Keir Starmer from implementing them here in the UK and effectively crashing our economy against a brick wall?
James.
Esther, you've got a pretty apathetic general sort of populace. The turnout for the votes was quite low, as you said, but you've got a highly organised Muslim community vote. How does that then affect Keir Starmer, not just in terms of his policies, but more his general outlook internationally? Does he start to play to that? And does that fundamentally change the outlook of the UK?
Well, fortunately for Keir Starmer, he can actually afford to take the blow of many Muslim voters basically leaving the Labour Party, because the Tories have done a spectacular job of basically making sure that the rest of the country can't be bothered with them anymore. That the seats that the Labour Party couldn't afford to lose because of the collapsing Muslim vote, basically, they're automatically transferring to them. So you see many, particularly in this latest local elections, you see many Leave voters, Brexit Leave voters that have moved to the Labour Party, and they've basically been able to absorb the votes that the Labour Party would have lost had they just lost the Muslim vote. So actually, I don't think it's going to affect Keir Starmer's party at all. And that's no credit to Keir Starmer or the enthusiasm for him and his party. It's more just a testament to the spectacular failure of the Tories with connecting to the electorate in any significant way.
So you mentioned Scotland. We'll just have a quick look, a reminder at our old friend Humza Yousaf, who stood down. He had some pretty strong views a few years ago. Have a listen to this.
The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white.
Esther, he seemed to have a problem with white people. He's now gone. What's happening in Scotland?
Yes, Humza Yousaf's delusion has finally caught up to him. I just on a side point about the whole, many people in Scotland being white, I find that very strange, particularly as a Ghanaian woman. I mean, I don't think anyone would ever come to Ghana and be like, oh, there are too many black people here, or go to Korea and say there are too many Asian politicians. It's absolutely absurd and ludicrous. I mean, it astonishes me that someone like this can be given a platform in the way that he has. But anyway, he's been forced to resign this week after the coalition he had with the Scottish Green Party collapsed, mainly because he basically jettisoned many of the key policies in the Butte House Agreement, which was the agreement that basically brought the Scottish Green Party into the fold and secured the SNP's majority coalition in Holyrood. And one of the key pledges was the fact that, they decided to let go of the pledge to reduce Scotland's carbon emissions by 70% by 2030, which is completely unworkable. They also had so many other pledges about reducing child poverty and promising all this money. That can't happen if the Scottish economy has basically been ground to a halt to meet all these unrealistic environmental targets. So he had no choice but to resign. He's also made himself very unpopular. He froze council tax without any consultation with the councils, even though they're all hard-strapped for cash. He was still pushing these ridiculous gender extreme laws, gender ideology laws, self-ID laws, which goes against a lot of the mainstream policy here in the UK, more broadly speaking. So he, in his short run as First Minister, he was virtually useless, and I think his ideology really overtook common sense.
Esther Kraku, it was great to chat to you. We'll chat again soon. Stay safe there in the UK. After the break, Rita's reality check, and we'll speak to Liberal Senator Claire Chandler about the Albanese government's obsession with misinformation. In a tick.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan Class Action Dean, James Ambulance Chaser McPherson, and I'm Rita Panahi. Coming up, we'll be speaking about Albo's latest censorship push. But first, there is a battle happening right now in the federal court involving two of our most prominent senators. The Greens Deputy Leader Mehreen Faruqi is suing One Nation leader Pauline Hanson over a comment that Faruqi has labelled the ultimate racist slur. Faruqi is alleging the comment made on X, formerly Twitter, by Hanson is in breach of Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which makes it unlawful to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate someone with race-based comments. It's a case that has huge significance for free speech in this country, with some fine legal minds arguing 18C is unconstitutional. It certainly is an odious piece of legislation that is open to abuse. Who determines what is offensive, and Why should that be something that is unlawful and ends in individuals being dragged into court? To quote Ricky Gervais, just because you're offended doesn't mean you're right. But back to Faruqi v Hansen and the comments that started this whole costly courtroom tussle. The spat began when Faruqi posted this message after Queen Elizabeth's death. She tweeted, "Condolences to those who knew the Queen. I cannot mourn the leader of a racist empire built on stolen lives, land and wealth of colonised peoples. We are reminded of the urgency of treaty with First Nations, justice and reparations for British colonies and becoming a republic." Senator Hansen responded with this message to Faruqi. "Your attitude appalls and disgusts me. When you immigrated to Australia, you took every advantage of this country. You took citizenship, bought multiple homes and a job in Parliament. It's clear you're not happy, so pack your bags and pee off back to Pakistan, PH." In affidavit, Senator Faruqi claimed that she is marginalised in Parliament and made to feel so small sitting alongside Hansen. She said, "There are days where I will spend hours in the chamber in Canberra with this aggressor sitting right across the room from me. It's difficult for me to go in there every day, to sit there and do my job." She also said, "I have a physiological reaction to going into the chamber to sit in close proximity to someone who has caused so much upheaval and distress in my life." In court this week, Faruqi argued that racist comments against white people, well, they're not really racist after all. She said it is tied to who holds the power and who has the authority to perpetuate racism and oppress people. And in this country, the power of that is held by white people. It appears Senator Faruqi can dish it out but not take it. She would have known perfectly well her post about the Queen on the day the Queen passed away was wildly offensive to many Australians and was always going to inspire a robust response on social media. Outside the court, the Deputy Greens leader refused to answer what I would have thought was a rather simple question. Are all white people racist?
Senator, are all white people racist?
No comment.
That's not a no. That's not a no. Are all white people racist?
One would have thought the answer to that question posed by independent journalist Chris de Bruin was obvious, but the senator was unable or unwilling to answer it. For her part, Senator Hansen maintains that her comment was not racially motivated, that she has publicly told white men to go back to where they came from. Indeed, back in 2018, Pauline Hanson on national television told then Senator Darren Hinch to pack his bags and go back to New Zealand.
Darren, you wouldn't have a clue. You're half asleep most of the damn time. You wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about.
You voted against medicinal cannabis.
Wrong. You vote with the Greens most of the time. You have no idea. Look, Pauline, I'm not here to argue with you. Go and pack your bags and get on the next plane out of the country. That's where you belong.
Oh, that's your usual thing to everybody. Every migrant, get out of the country. I've been an Australian citizen since 1980. That sort of argument is puerile, stupid.
Well, go back to New Zealand, pick up your manners, Darren, and then come back when you got some manners.
It's pretty robust right there, isn't it? Senator Hansen also argues that she was defending the Queen and an institution that Faruqi has decided to attack as racist. In her affidavit, she said, "The Queen was the only monarch of Australia during my life. Like many Australians, I saw her as a sign of constancy." Senator Faruqi did not even have the respect to wait a day before viciously insulting her. Hansen's legal team have argued her comments fall within a legal exemption that allows fair comment on matters of public interest, but there is also a question of whether 18C is unconstitutional. In their closing submission, they also said this. They said that her tweet was not reasonably likely to have a sufficiently serious impact on the group or groups of people identified by the applicant, partly because it was obviously directed at the applicant, that's Senator Faruqi, on the basis of her own tweet and would have been so understood. Now, as I said earlier, this case could have a significant impact on free speech in this country. I have long argued 18C should be abolished. Tony Abbott had a mandate to repeal Section 18C in 2013, but thanks to the cancerous moderates within the Liberal Party, you know who you are, they threatened to cross the floor on that issue and he dumped the planned changes the following year. Tony Abbott has since said that failure to amend the Racial Discrimination Act was among the biggest mistakes of his time in office. It's time the Peter Dutton-led Liberals put free speech back on the agenda. And let's leave the final word to the great Rowan Atkinson. He gave this speech all the way back in 2012. Sadly, things have got considerably worse since then.
The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavourable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay. For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend.
Fantastic. Well, Labor have become victims of their own misinformation this week as the detainee debacle we were talking about has reignited and their censorship push escalates. Well, joining us to discuss this is Liberal Senator Claire Chandler. Claire, great to see you. I know you too are a great fan of Rowan Atkinson's, as we all are. You've got a terrific piece in The Spectator Australia this week in which you talk about free speech and the problems with the Albanese push for misinformation. Tell us your thoughts.
Thanks so much for having me on the show once again. And yes, as you say, Rowan, I did have a piece in The Spectator this week, once again outlining the issues with the Albanese government's Orwellian misinformation bill. And listening to Rita's piece just before, I mean, it outlines the issues that we have in this country when government tries to regulate what can and can't be said in the marketplace of ideas, whether that is, speaking face to face, as once was the way that people had these conversations, and now we're having a similar conversation about whether or not speech should be regulated on social media. And that's what this bill that the Albanese government has brought forward is all fundamentally about. And I find it quite ironic that the government thinks that it should be in a position to determine what is right and what is wrong and what is true and what is false on social media in a situation where they can't even get their own lines straight, like you say, about the immigration debacle in terms of whether the Commonwealth actually opposed bail or not for the individual who has since committed some pretty atrocious acts out in Western Australia. So why should we trust government to know what is right and wrong when they themselves, at best, aren't sure what's going on within their own government and at worst are not being upfront with the Australian people about that?
James.
Claire, I agree absolutely with everything you've said, but I want to ask you this. The E-Safety Commissioner was a coalition government appointee under the Turnbull government. So when the Liberals get back in power, the first thing you're going to do, are you going to scrap the E-Safety Commissioner?
Well, I think it's important to remember why the E-Safety Commissioner was created. And in talking about how difficult it is to regulate content on social media, one of the things we do need to be wary of is that social media is a platform, like anywhere else in society, where people can put very violent or very explicit or sexually inappropriate content on social media. And we need to have a conversation about whether there is a role for government to play in being able to take that that content down at the very extreme end of the scale. And that's the sort of work that I think the E-Safety Commissioner should be concentrating time on. What the E-Safety Commissioner shouldn't be doing is seeking out stronger powers to regulate opinion and ideas in the online space. And I fear that with the bill that the Albanese government is putting forward, what they are trying to do is give the E-Safety Commissioner those powers so that one bureaucrat, one individual, an unelected individual in this country will be able to say what opinions should be on social media and what opinions shouldn't be on social media.
And one leftist activist that the coalition appointed, let's not forget, she's hardly apolitical. I want to ask you about some developments in the UK. You'd be aware the NHS is going to be scrapping so much of the language lunacy we have seen in recent years. And this really seems to be a rather dramatic step where they're not just discouraging the use of words like chest feeding and things like people who have ovaries as opposed to saying women. They're going to say they're banned. You're going to call it breastfeeding, you're going to call women women, and you're not going to allow trans women or biological men who identify as women to be in women-only spaces in hospitals. Tell me about this development.
Well, I think, Rita, these are some really welcome developments, and I have known for some time that the United Kingdom was quite far ahead of Australia in this regard, in looking very critically at how this radical gender ideology has taken over so many elements of public life, but particularly so many elements of the health system. And I'd certainly like to see us looking a little more closely at these issues here in Australia, because I don't think there's any question that the vast majority of the community in the UK and here as well think it's wildly inappropriate to refer to women as people who have uteruses or breastfeeding mothers as chest-feeding mothers. I mean, not only is it inappropriate, it's medically inaccurate in so many instances. It doesn't make medical sense to be using these sorts of words, I think is the expression I'm looking for. And so I really think that here in Australia we need to be having an independent review, not just into the issues and the concerns that the Cass review have revealed, like you say, but also how did we find ourselves in a position where this radical gender ideology has taken over our bureaucracy, has taken over our institutions in a way that a practice of care has been provided to young children in this country, where we know overseas that practice has been completely debunked and is not having good medical outcomes for children.
Mm-hmm.
Claire, just briefly, we've been talking earlier on the show about the protests, the pro-Palestinian protests, the overt anti-Semitism that's been popping up in our universities. It's way worse overseas in the States and Britain, but it is happening here. And we were debating, what is the role of government in stepping in, showing some leadership? Your colleague, Sarah Henderson, has been very strident, saying that Jason Clare has gone missing in action. What do you think? We all love free speech, as we've been discussing. So where should government be involved in either putting, defunding universities that won't prevent the sort of anti-Semitic hate speech we've been seeing? What's your thoughts?
I think that the Australian government absolutely has to provide some more leadership in this space. I've been particularly looking at what is happening at Columbia University over the last week, and I'm very grateful that we haven't seen scenes precisely like that here in Australia, but I also think that there's an argument that it could potentially only be a matter of time before we do. If government doesn't make a very clear stance and say to universities that, obviously we want free speech on our university campuses, that's something I have felt I still do feel very strongly about, but I've been very outspoken on in the past. But we need to make sure that where these protests are happening, that they are lawful, that they're not violent, and that they're not making these sort of really anti-Semitic, horrific comments towards the Jewish community here in Australia. So I would like to see some leadership from the government and from the university sector more broadly, so that we don't see these scenes that have been playing out overseas happening in Australia as well.
Senator Claire Chandler, great as always to chat to you. Thanks for coming on Outsiders this morning. We'll chat again soon, and you can read Claire there in The Spectator Australia. After the break, we've got some net zany, we've got some wackademia coming up. won't believe it. In a tick. You're watching Outsiders, and thank you so much for watching every Sunday morning. Well, Wackademia, the wacky world of academia, has gone wacky the world over, particularly in the States, Britain, and also, sadly, here. We're going to show you a few of the various clips this week in a kind of Wackademia special, if you like. Let's kick off with this Canadian. This is the sort of stuff kids are being exposed to at university.
Not terrorists, they are resistance fighters, they are freedom fighters, and they are heroes for a new world. As it is in so many ways, as it shuts down the supply lines of genocide, Yemen is leading the way. Because Yemen declared Israel and the United States to be terrorist entities and subjected to sanctions.
So, Rita and James, that's in Canada. You've got pro-Yemen, pro-Hamas there on the steps. And what amused me, Rita, was that the Houthis have come out and said, oh, yeah, why don't you come across to our universities? You'd love it there.
I am fully on board with this. If you find the West so objectionable, if you think we're on stolen land, if you think this is the evil empire, then why are you here? This is what I do not understand. I mean, we've got free movement where the COVID days are over. Get on the plane.
Next you'll be doing a Pauline Hanson and telling them to go home, James.
Well, no, I'm not telling them to go home.
To go to the Yemen,
I'm telling them to go to the countries whose interests they identify with, whose values they identify with, because it certainly ain't here, because I would bet any money she is Canadian born and bred. She's not an immigrant.
So, James, the kid from Mosman who's gone to Sydney Uni and is now waving his Hamas flag, off to Yemen. One-way ticket.
I will be the first to donate money towards their flights. This is a great idea. Could you believe Yemen saying, look, any uni students who get in trouble, we'll take you.
We'll take you.
Well, I'd love to see a uni student take them up on the offer. Incidentally, that woman protesting in Canada, she was actually charged with supporting a terrorist organisation. Not because of what she said about Yemen, but she went on to support Hamas and to endorse what they've done.
Well, so she was basically saying Hamas are heroes for murdering, raping, butchering, beheading people. I mean, it is, you're right, it's absolute terrorism. This blockading, now this is where free speech becomes intimidation, harassment. We've heard of all the number of Jewish students. One girl was knocked unconscious. We'll look at that in a sec. But here's how they do it. They blockade them. Have a look at this.
He's cornered. Okay, they're now cornering me. I'm not moving.
So this was a Jewish guy trying to get through. They just wouldn't let him through. We saw far worse than that was this Jewish girl who was knocked unconscious by these mobs, these pro-Hamas mobs. Have a look. Rita, this is where it gets really serious. This is 1930s stuff.
Oh, it is. And that's why a lot of these counter-protests have started. And sometimes it's just a student holding an Israeli flag, not even saying anything, just as a show of support to the Jewish students who are feeling under attack. I've been playing these clips all week. We've got now a new show, I don't know if you know, Friday nights, 9:30.
Friday nights, Rita Panihi show.
No, Lefty's losing it Friday nights. The Rita Panihi show Monday to Thursday, 11 p.m. But every night on the Rita Panihi show, we play these sorts of clips because there's more clips than we've got time to play, and they vary from stuff that you can laugh at and mock and go, how the hell can these kids be in university? They're dumb as bricks. And then you see stuff that's really quite sinister, violent, and you've got people who are broken, who've got just such a warped moral compass where they think their history is going to judge them kindly. They think they are on the side of the angels, and they are so repugnant and so aggressive in their activism. We've got to be aware of this stuff. You cannot turn a blind eye. As I've said many times, you might not care about the culture wars, but the culture wars care about you.
Well, James, just
and ignoring them won't make it go away.
Just have a listen to this one: colonialism, imperialism, Zionism. This is basically a couple of students masked, doing the whole thing, but telling us the entire agenda. This is what kids are learning, all about colonialism, imperialism, and Zionism. Have a listen.
The fact that the University of California is founded on colonialism, it's inherently a violent institution. There needs to be an addressment of U.S. imperialism and its ties to the UC system and how it perpetuates war and violence abroad. Not only abroad, but also here, locally. We see this with the brutality, the police brutality that black and brown students face here at UCLA, Arab students, Muslim students, Palestinian students. And I myself have personally been faced those violences that the UC has perpetuated and continues to perpetuate. It's not just a means of divestment, it's a divestment from Zionism.
Blaming Zionism, James, and even some of the teachers are joining in with this nonsense.
If the University of California is inherently violent and founded on colonialism, why are you there? Exactly. What are you doing? Why did you enrol?
Why are you giving them fees? This is the thing. Every single one of these hypocrites is enriching these institutions that they say is abhorrent and should be abolished. But this is what the agenda's about. And we've said it here from day one. It's very clear. Anyone who's been paying attention, this is far bigger than anti-Israeli, anti-Semitism. Yes. This is anti-West. It's against, it's Marxist at its core, and you've got to see it for what it is or you'll never be able to defeat it.
Anyway, I always thought the University of California was founded on marijuana and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Anyway, after the break, we've got Ian Plimer. Don't go away. Back in a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders, the show that looks at those issues raised by voices that go against the flow and refuse to be cowed by the prevailing orthodoxies of the day. Voices prepared to say the unsayable. This week, at the Conservative conference CPAC in Hungary, a young Dutch woman, Eva Vladingerbroek, dared to say the unsayable and clocked up some 50 million views on social media for daring to do so. More on her in a moment. But first, I want to mention another political outsider who dared to say the unsayable 56 years ago last month, and in doing so, lost his job, lost his career, lost his reputation. Overnight, he went from outsider to outcast, all for saying the unsayable.
On the 20th of April 1968, the Conservative MP Enoch Powell spoke against mass immigration at the party's political centre in Birmingham, in what is known as the Rivers of Blood speech.
Back in the pre-digital era, only bits of that speech were actually filmed, but this is the most infamous comment.
As I look ahead, I am filled with foreboding, like the Roman. I seem to see the River Tiber foaming with much blood.
In essence, Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech was predicting that mass, unfettered immigration from the Third World into Britain or any other Western European nation would inevitably lead to tribalism and a clash of cultures, which in turn would lead to violence on the streets. Not because of race, but because of culture and demographics. Enoch Powell was of the opinion that once certain immigrant communities reached a critical mass, they would use all the legal, institutional, electoral and other means of the Westminster system not to integrate themselves into the local culture, but to dominate and replace that culture with their own. All the trendies and lovies went berserk. This is ridiculous. This is racist. Even the Beatles had a go at Enoch.
So Ted Heath said to Enoch Powell, he said, you better get out. How's it gonna try? I said, Enoch Powell, Enoch, you better go home.
And Paul McCartney even wrote a spoof song about immigration and repatriation, which became, with very different lyrics, the smash hit Get Back. The speech caused a furor, and Enoch Powell immediately became a hate figure. To the left particular, but to many others who accused him of incitement and racism. Naturally, the bedwetters in the Conservative Party were equally outraged by Enoch Powell's speech, and 2 days later, Powell was sacked by Ted Heath because of his inflammatory speech. Margaret Thatcher was one of the few Conservative MPs who believed Powell should have been listened to rather than dismissed. A decade or so on, and Powell's predictions about European and Western culture being replaced became the basis for Samuel Huntington's much maligned book, The Clash of Civilizations, in which Huntington argued that, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Islam would become the biggest challenge to Western cultural dominance. So, were they right or were they wrong? This week in Germany, there were large protests with thousands of people calling for the introduction of a caliphate to replace the German Democratic Republic. And they are not alone in that sentiment. Here's part of a broadcast chat by a couple discussing how to bring about a caliphate in the UK by working within the system, which is pretty much exactly what Enoch Powell predicted.
How can we, re-establish the Khilafah again?
So there are three methods, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Our brothers from Hizb ut-Tahrir who believe you do some grassroots dawah, you awaken the community, you awaken the ummah, but really you seek power from a select group of elite who will give you nusra, and then you do maybe something like, but not restricted to a military coup takeover.
Interestingly, across Western campuses, Islamic prayers and conversion have now become more common. A recent survey in Germany claims to show some Christian school children are now converting to Islam out of fear and desperation to fit in. And many students believe the Quran is more important than the laws in Germany. At CPAC in Hungary, Eva Vladingerbrock, a strong critic of mass immigration, particularly the EU's open borders policies, made a speech which, as I mentioned, has now had over 50 million views. After listing several crimes and incidents, such as stabbings committed in the past week across Europe, which Eva believes to have been committed by immigrants or asylum seekers, she says this.
But we all know that these incidents aren't incidents anymore. If there's one thing that's for sure, it's that we know, and our governments also know, that there is a link between mass migration and crime. In the Dutch city of Dordrecht, something interesting happened the other day. They announced, and this is a small city in the Netherlands, in my home country, that a new asylum center will be put in that little town. And what did the municipality do? They said, we are going to offer citizens who live in the vicinity of this center €1,000 to take extra safety measures. Our new reality in Europe consists of frequent rapes, stabbings, killings, murders, shootings, even beheadings. But let me be clear about one thing. This did not used to happen before. This is a newly imported problem.
Now, there are those who would argue violent crime and so on has nothing to do with mass immigration and that you can't make that link. But the figures speak for themselves in terms of the surge of immigration into Europe over the past few years. Indeed, this week, for example, GB News reported the shocking statistic that 77% of solved rape cases on Parisian streets last year were committed by foreigners. Over recent years, there have been any number of migrant-associated crimes and scandals, from the vile Pakistani grooming and rape gangs who abused 1,400 young white girls in Rotherham, in Britain, to the New Year's Eve mass sexual assaults of over 1,000 women on New Year's Eve in Cologne and Hamburg by migrant gangs in 2016. As a young white Dutch Christian woman, Eva Vladingerbroek has her own fears and theories, which she articulated at the CPAC conference.
I know one thing for sure, and that is that if nothing changes, if we don't start to seriously fight for our continent, for our religion, for our people, our countries, then this time that we live in will go down in history as the time in which Western nations no longer had to get invaded by hostile armies in order to be conquered. The native, white, Christian European population is being replaced at an ever-accelerating rate.
Whoa, grab the smelling salts. There's the R word, replacement. And then Eva Vladingerbroek says what no one ever dares to say.
So I'm going to draw the forbidden conclusion here. The Great Replacement theory is no longer a theory. It's reality. And what's interesting about replacement is that the establishment will either deny its existence, or when they admit to it, they say that it's a good thing that the native European population is soon no longer a majority on its own continent. And of course, by now, I think we all know what they mean with the word diversity. It means less white people, less of you.
Fewer white people, Eva, fewer, not less. But I shouldn't complain. Eva's English grammar is no worse than that of most kids who come out of Australian universities. And her definition of diversity is spot on, in my opinion. Eva then does a detour, and this, in some ways, is my favourite part of her speech, as she rails against the globalists' brutalist, postmodern vision of Europe, the World Economic Klaus Schwab EU Great Reset version of Europe.
Their vision of the future is the neoliberal, unrecognizable Europe, where every city becomes kind of like Brussels. Ugly, dirty, unsafe, zero social cohesion, where the buildings are constantly under construction and they never ever seem to finish, and even when they do, the end result is uglier somehow than what they started with.
Sounds just like Melbourne under Dan Andrews and Jacinta Allen. Just joking. Anyway, back to Eva.
And what are we left with? A permanent state of isolation, confusion, and disorientation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the New World Order. I think that if we really think about the organized, structural attack on our civilization, that we don't do enough. Do we do enough to stop the attack on our families, on our continent, on our countries, on our religion? When we hear about another murder, another stabbing of a young innocent child, do we do enough? When we know that our national sovereignty has been given up in less than a century to Brussels, do we do enough? When we hear that Christian kids in Germany are now converting to Islam to fit in, do we do enough? I don't think so.
Interestingly, the much maligned Elon Musk, maligned, I might add, not only by Labor but also to their shame by the coalition, Elon Musk responded to Eva's speech, which was broadcast on Twitter, saying, quote, "The problem," this is Elon Musk, quote, "the problem with the Great Replacement theory is that it fails to address the foundational issue of low birth rates. Record low birth rates are leading to population collapse in Europe and even faster population collapse in most of Asia. The countries are simply shrinking away." He says, Elon Musk, if this doesn't turn around, then any countries on Earth with low birth rates will become empty of people and fall into ruin, like the remains, Elon says, we see of the many long-dead civilizations. End of quote. Well, Elon has a point, as this Muslim cleric explained, talking about the Swedish city of Malmö.
Within one generation, it is very likely that this city will almost be half Muslim. because this city is just not there. The locals are not reproducing. It's not our fault. I mean, it's not, I don't know why they're getting irritated at us. It's not our fault we're having kids, right?
Got a point. Western European low birth rates are no doubt a problem, especially when the highest birth rates in Western cities are often among communities who are less inclined to integrate or adopt Western values. My friend and colleague Peter Credlin had a great piece this week about how even here in Australia, Labor Party politics are driven by appeasing the cultural and religious demands of certain migrant communities of the outer suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne. Peter wrote that, quote, "Immigrant communities are now driving Australia's foreign policy in ways that are at odds with the national interest." Peter says the Albanese government's changing policy towards the Middle East is the result of pressure from Muslim activists. End of quote. Well, spot on, Peter. But what hope for integration when, as Caroline Marcus reported here on Sky this week, you have young Melbourne children, for example, being used as mouthpieces for radical pro-Palestinian activism?
From the river, sea, Palestine, free.
Never before seen footage of the rally from January 24 has been obtained by Sky News. It shows children being coached to chant anti-Israel slogans.
This is a tactic that was also seen in the US this week at Stanford University.
From the river to the sea, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, Palestine will be free.
And as we reported here on Outsiders last week, a similarly disgraceful episode took place at Sydney University, with children chanting these same vile and hateful slogans. What hope do we have for a peaceful, multicultural nation when a prominent Muslim academic whose salary and grants you and I pay for is getting Aussie kids to do this?
Intifada, Intifada, Intifada. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. 5, 6, 7, 8, Israel is a terrorist state.
From the river to the sea, a genocidal slogan. You see, it never was about race. That was always just a red herring. It has always been, as was forewarned by Enoch Powell, as was forewarned by Samuel Huntington, about the clash of cultures, when high levels of immigration are not backed up with policies to ensure high levels of integration. That in turn leads to cultures alien to our own, using the tools of freedom we all take for granted to undermine the very values and institutions which created them. As we mentioned earlier in the show, in London overnight, Hamas-supporting Islamists happy to shout Allahu Akbar have won local council elections in Britain. Meanwhile, the Albanese government is currently allowing the largest rate of immigration ever into this country as we speak, not to mention permitting thousands of Gazans into this country from an area rife with anti-Semitism. What could possibly go wrong? I'll leave the final word to the original outsider himself.
We've seen what happened when Europe opened their doors to jihad. Look at Paris, look at London. They're no longer recognizable. And I'm going to get myself into a lot of trouble with the folks in Paris and the folks in London. But you know what? That's the fact. They are no longer recognizable, and we can't let that happen to our country. We have incredible culture, tradition. Nothing wrong with their culture, their tradition. We can't let that happen here, and I'll never let it happen to the United States of America.
And on a lighter note, because it's always worth looking on the lighter side, here's the clash of cultures as viewed from the other side of the coin.
So would you believe in the democratic vote, though? So would people be allowed to vote in women politicians?
Joining us now to discuss the left's latest crazy climate change gamble is geologist Ian Plimer. Professor Plimer, great to see you as always. Now, I want you to explain to me, you are a geologist par excellence. I want you to explain to me what could possibly go wrong with pumping carbon dioxide into the greatest Artesian Basin, the great Artesian Basin, the greatest aquifer in Australia. Anything that could possibly go wrong, and why is this madness even being contemplated, Ian Plimer?
Well, there's a company, Glencore, that wants to liquefy carbon dioxide from a power station near Toowoomba and drive it a couple of 100 kilometres and put it underground as liquid carbon dioxide. Now, this has the full support of Tanya Plibersek. And of course, nothing could go wrong. We've only got to go back to the 21st of August 1986 in Lake Neos in Cameroon, where carbon dioxide exploded out of a crater on a still night. It filled up the valleys. It's a gas that's heavier than air. It filled up the valleys and 1,746 people were asphyxiated. 3,500 cattle were asphyxiated and countless wildlife died. Nothing could go wrong. We already know that liquid carbon dioxide, when it's under pressure, explodes like a bomb. Now, we geologists spend a lot of our time looking for areas where carbon dioxide has naturally exploded, because this is where you find gold deposits. This is where you find copper-gold deposits. Now, if your memory doesn't go back to 1986, why not go back to February 2020? And there was a carbon dioxide pipeline in Mississippi, only a small pipeline. It burst and a whole village was inundated with carbon dioxide and 40 people were taken off to hospital. Of course, it's a good idea to cover the country with wind turbines, to cover the country with solar panels, and to put carbon dioxide into the great Artesian Basin, into the aquifer, which is the biggest freshwater aquifer in the world. It covers 65% of Queensland. It's a great idea. We're going to save the planet by destroying it.
Ian, you were, I gather, I assume that all the boffins in Canberra were well aware of Lake Neos and are well aware of the dangers of pumping carbon dioxide into our most precious water aquifer. So I want to tip my hat to you, because I believe you were the person who actually identified this, where none of the bureaucrats actually bothered to. But answer me this. I get very confused, Ian, because I would have thought, what happens to this nature-positive idea that we shouldn't be messing with nature? What happens if we start injecting carbon dioxide into the Great Artesian Basin? Will the rainbow serpent become the fizzy rainbow serpent? What's going to happen there? And why isn't Tanya Plibersek jumping in saying this shouldn't be allowed?
Well, I did an extensive search of the scientific literature, all of the government reports, and read the Glencore report. No one had dawned on the fact that we can have a massive phreatic explosion of carbon dioxide where you hold it under pressure at depth and it will explode. Now, of course, you'll have this massive fizzy drink, but it then poses a few other questions. What is Tanya Plibersek's department doing? Why do we have so many bureaucrats not looking at the bleeding obvious? Most of them were alive when this happened. Most of them have got a memory. Maybe some have got a memory of a goldfish, but most of them have got a memory. We should have known this, and we should know that if you displace air with carbon dioxide, it's not that carbon dioxide is poisonous. It's just that there's no air to breathe. So it takes no one very special to point out the bleeding obvious to those people in Canberra who should have worked this out.
Rita.
I'm just interested in your take, Professor, on Chris Bowen's latest pronouncement on X about nuclear energy and how expensive it is and how we need to focus on renewable sources of energy if we want to bring down costs. Would you care to fact check that for us right here, right now, without notice?
The facts, Rita, are that 19 of the 20 G20 countries have nuclear power. It's 24/7, 365. It's backup for unreliable wind and solar. And what's more, when we put in solar and when we put in wind, we destroy farmland. We destroy perfectly good farmland for unreliable power. And the fingerprint that we have for a nuclear power station or a coal-fired power station is very, very small. But we now have this other wonderful scheme to inject liquid carbon dioxide into the aquifer of the Great Artesian Basin. Again, we're attacking farmers. And why does this country insist on attacking farmers, pushing them to suicide, sending them bankrupt, wrapping them in red tape and green tape and black tape and now blue tape from the UN? What is wrong with Chris Bowen? What is wrong with people in cities, especially those on the left, where they want to destroy those people who produce food?
James.
Ian, two quick questions. If we inject carbon dioxide into the earth, they have to monitor this not just for a couple of years, this is for hundreds of years they have to monitor. Is that right? And who's responsible for that? And second, if there's an explosion, who's responsible for that? Is it the company? Is it the government? Who takes the responsibility?
Well, James, you hit it on the head. No one takes responsibility. Just look at all of those running for cover with COVID inquiries. And that was only a couple of years ago. No one takes responsibility. And to monitor this, you are quite correct, takes hundreds of years. But we also know from very simple chemistry that if we make carbonic acid, then that carbonic acid in the aquifer will dissolve arsenic, cadmium and lead, and that will come into the irrigation water, the drinking water and the stock water. So we already know this. We shouldn't even attempt to do this. And if we're really worried about carbon dioxide, then let it go into the atmosphere. It's plant food, and let us feed plants. I'm now of the girth where I can't hug trees, but I do like to feed plants their food, which is carbon dioxide.
Fantastic. Ian Plimer, as always. Well, you can read all Ian's memories of Lake Nyos in The Spectator Australia next week. Always great to have you on, Ian Plimer, Professor Plimer there. Thank you so much. Coming up, we've got lots more to talk about. We've got Army Horowitz coming on the show in the tick. And James's editorial. Don't go away. Back in the tick.
Welcome back to Outsiders. Well, with pro-Palestinian encampments springing up at universities around the country, I thought it was about time we produced a special guide to help you speak like a university protester. With this guide and a bit of luck, you'll soon be able to communicate easily with your local Jew-hating, Hamas-loving university student. So, with no time to lose, grab your keffiyeh and let's begin. The first thing you need to know is that when university students insist we must believe all women, what they really mean is we must believe all women except for raped Jewish women. If a woman standing alone in the middle of a vast university campus while wearing a chastity belt screams rape, you must believe her. But if a Jewish woman is raped by Hamas terrorists using GoPros to record the assault before they make phone calls home to mum and dad in Gaza to boast about what they did, well, who's to really say what happened? This explains why university students love the United Nations. They all speak the same language. Here's another one. When pro-Palestinian university students insist we need safe spaces on campus for minority groups, what they really mean to say is help us chase Jews off campus while threatening to beat them with planks of wood. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't Jews, who comprise just 0.4% of Australia's population, a minority group? Well, no, not yet. Only when Jews comprise 0% of Australia's population will our university revolutionaries consider them a minority group who qualify for protection on campus. Obviously, there'll be none left by that point, which will be a very good thing because it will mean that the protection can be guaranteed. Are you with me? University encampment speak is easy to understand once you get the hang of it. For instance, when you hear Hamas-loving university students complain that microaggressions are awful, what they really mean is that chanting at the top of your voice for intifada against Jews is awesome. It's like if you misgender someone on campus, that's evil. You can't call a man in a dress a man. But if you follow Jewish students around campus calling them Nazis, well, that's not a problem. Mm-hmm. Once you're up to speed with the lingo, you'll be able to communicate easily with university arts majors and your local Greens MP. But I repeat myself. Now, there are almost as many Aboriginal flags as Palestinian flags being waved around on university campuses. These uni protesters insist on the rights of Indigenous people. Of course, what they really mean is the rights of all Indigenous people apart from people who are Indigenous to the land of Israel. Those Indigenous people can get in the sea. Because on a university campus, First Nations are great, just not that First Nation. Now, if you're struggling to keep up, that's okay. It's Sunday morning. I find standing on my head while listening to pro-Palestinian uni students somehow makes them make more sense. Let me give you 2 more tips in this handy how-to guide to understand woke university students. When crop-top wearing, rainbow flag waving student protesters preach that homophobia is really bad, what they actually mean is that homophobia is bad except when it comes from Islamist groups who want to kill gays. Now, I know the head of Hezbollah, for example, recently preached that gays should be killed, but like Gas the Jews at the Opera House, it only sounded like he said that. What he really said, and I'm sure the New South Wales police will confirm this, was that everyone is welcome in Palestine, aside from, the Jews, because, well, they're gay. And finally, when your local Aussie-born university student says that cultural appropriation is wrong, what he really means is, how cool do I look in this stylish keffiyeh? If you or I walked around with, say, a didgeridoo, that would be condemned as cultural appropriation. But if a uni student wears a keffiyeh purchased 5 minutes ago in order to show support for terrorist groups wanting to kill Jews, well, that's appropriate. So that concludes today's guide to understanding pro-Palestinian speech on your local university campus. I hope that with your newly acquired language skills, you're now well equipped to understand our latest breed of uni students, by which I mean useless wannabe revolutionaries spewing nonsense all over the lawns of our once hallowed institutions.
Great, thanks, James. Well, riots have broken out, as we've said, on US university campuses this week as campus anti-Israel protests escalate to a new worrying level. Well, joining us now is someone who has more than plenty of experience on these campuses, filmmaker and great friend of this show, Army Horowitz. Army, great to see you. How are you, mate? You've survived.
I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm all good, man. Takes more than 15 pro-Palestinian thugs. Take down your boy.
Well, tell us it. We're going to play the footage first, then you can tell us what happened. We'll just play a quick grab. You've had quite the week, as always, and here's a bit of the film that you made a few days ago. Let's have a look.
American! I'm an American. Hey, this is my flag. Oh, don't hit me. You get out of here. No, get out of here. No, I'm not. Get out of here. Get out of here. Hey, you're not going nowhere. You ain't going nowhere. Leave. Leave. No, leave. Hey, don't hit me. Don't fucking hit me. Don't hit me, mother. Get the off me. Yeah. Are you gonna hurt me? Get out. You gonna attack me? I'm not scared of
Hey, you gotta.
Don't choke me. What the I'm an American. I want to go to campus.
You can go to hell.
Stop. Yo, man. I'm not leaving. You can punch me all you want. I'm not leaving.
Habibi.
Hey, you just choke me? Get off of me. Choke me?
Don't touch him.
Choke me?
Stop, yo, what the hell is
I'm not fighting.
So, Army, we're used to laughing at many of your videos. There's always an element of humour there, and there's always a very strong point that you always make. But that was scary stuff. Were you shocked at what happened?
Yeah, look, obviously when I do what I do, look, there's sometimes an element of danger, very, very rarely. I mean, look, it's been many years since I shot something, was actually physically attacked. No, I thought that, look, the idea of the video, I think it's important to make this clear. The idea of the video is I went with an American flag. I didn't fly an Israeli flag. I didn't identify myself as a Zionist. I didn't identify myself as Jewish. The idea behind this was, look, Iran had it right? Iran has been saying this for years, that Israel really is the small devil, the U.S. is the big devil, right? That's the entire point of this exercise. Ultimately, is it's not really about Israel? It really isn't. It really is about Western ideals. It's about Marxism. And they look at the U.S. as the leader in capitalism, the most successful nation on earth, and therefore it is the one that is most demonized. And I proved that by walking out with an American flag on an American campus. And that's what happened. So, look, I thought at worst what was going to happen was they grabbed the flag, they'd yell terrible things at me. I've had that done before, no sweat. Did I think it would devolve as quickly as it did to violence? No. It took, guys, I had the flag was barely out, maybe a second, under 2 seconds for sure. And they were on top of me. So, no, I didn't really expect it.
Yeah, you explained that the whole point of the protest was just to have the American flag, not say anything, and they are so triggered by the American flag that you have instant violence there. Meanwhile, we've got the Biden administration forgiving student loans. They're not coming out condemning these protesters in any sort of meaningful way. They're rewarding them by throwing taxpayer money at them.
Yeah, look, I as you know, I'm a straight shooter. I call as I see it. And on Rita, on your show and this show, when the October 7th happened, I said the Biden administration did a great job. I couldn't have expected anything more from a Democratic president when it came to Israel. I thought he was a strong supporter of Israel in both in deed and in action. I hate to say it, but in the last few months, that has changed. And I think the silence of the administration about these I want to say protests, but they are not just protests, right? They were stopping Jews from attending schools. To not condemn that, the full-throated condemnation was a big, huge problem to me. I mean, recently in the last day, they have condemned it. I think that's great. I frankly think it's too little too late. I think we have to start going after, look, when these campuses are tolerating this kind of behavior, not allowing Jews to attend school, we have to start looking at the funding of these schools. So yeah, I think more action needs to be taken.
James.
Army, we're starting to see a bit of a pushback from university students, American university students who are proud of America. They're raising the American flag on flagpoles. They're singing Born in the USA in front of these protesters. Why is that pushback coming from the young people themselves rather than from the university administrators? What does that say? And where do you think that leads? I mean, we saw the violence that was done to you as you did that. Are we going to end up with violence on university campuses as these other students push back?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, in terms of your first question, I mean, Guy, was that rhetorical? Like, do you expect campus professors and campus administrators to push back? They have been they're the vanguard of feeding this garbage to these students for years. They've been pushing this anti-Israel agenda for years. Of course they're not going to condemn it. Of course they're not going to be in the forefront of stopping it, because these are ideals that they have been pushing, and they have being evangelicals for this perspective for a long time. Garbage in, garbage out. We should expect nothing less. As far as violence goes, I mean, look, in this particular video, if you notice, I had my hands up the entire time. I did not strike back. The only time my hands left the air was to fend off attacks and punches. I went out of my way not to be violent, but if I was a student and somebody was trying to hurt me, I mean, of course you could expect people to defend themselves. What else would you expect?
And we've seen a Jewish girl was knocked unconscious, Army. We've heard lots of reports of Jewish kids being seriously intimidated, seriously harassed and bullied. What advice do you give to young Jewish kids? I mean, you're a very brave citizen journalist. You get out there. But what's it like for the young Jewish kids who just thought they were going to campus, going to college? Suddenly they're pariahs.
Look, this is a moment for them to stand up with a backbone and say, we're going to stand up for what we believe in, not back down. I don't think they should have gone to remote classes. I think the Jews should have just come en masse on campus. No, this is a moment where Jews have had it pretty easy in the U.S. for a very long time. That tide is turning now, unfortunately, from both the hard right and the hard left. And I think it's time for Jews to stand up for it. I think too many Jews for too long have had it too easy. And now it's time to understand that the times are not good. And it's time to stand up. It's time to fight back.
And the sense of entitlement of these students, Army, is something else. There was a list of demands from the UCLA students, for example. They wanted vegan treats. They wanted zip ties and rope. I mean, what were they planning, possibly, with those sorts of ingredients?
Don't forget the sunscreen and the Aquaphor. I mean, look, I do promote healthy skin living. So, yeah, I get it. Why else would they need the sunscreen? So I'm down with that. Look, I don't think they realize they're a parody of themselves. Like, literally, this is what Saturday Night Live would concoct if they were trying to create some kind of self-parody of what these people are doing. They're so lack of self-awareness is incredible. And yeah, they fell right into their trap. They look like a bunch of idiots because they are a bunch of idiots.
Armie Horowitz, always fantastic to chat to you. Keep up the great filming. Please stay safe, and we'll chat again soon. That's Armie Horowitz there in the States. Coming up, let's go to Canberra for the clown show in a tick. Roll up, step right this way. It's the wackiest show on earth. It's the Canberra Clown Show, starring our one and only lead clown, Al Bozo the Magician, the man who can drive a woman to tears in under 60 seconds.
To be clear, we did ask to speak, myself and Katie, and we're told that that wasn't possible, and that's fine. I respect the organisers' right to do that.
That's a full-out lie.
To do that. We're here today to demand that governments of all levels must do better, including my own, including every state and territory government.
Exposure 28.
Yes, that was Sarah Williams there, an Indigenous sexual assault survivor bursting into tears and accusing the Prime Minister of telling a bald-faced lie. Mansplaining Albo went on to mansplain in front of Katie Gallagher, no less. I thought she hated mansplaining, how he and his government must do better for women and prevent violence against women from occurring in the home. Quite right, too. Before Albo beat a hasty escape back into the safety and comfort of the Burley Griffin Big Top, where he belongs. But the clown show was just warming up, and as every good impresario knows, when you've got a good clown act up and running, why not milk it for all it's worth?
So she said you're on the stage with her and there was confusion about, you know, who was going to speak. And then you said behind her on the stage words to the effect of, I'm the Prime Minister and I run the country. Did you just say that?
Well, that I'm not going to get into, you know, that sort of debate.
Good miming there, Albo. But unfortunately, comedy turned to tragedy only shortly afterwards with the horrific news that a 73-year-old Perth woman, Ninette Simons, was attacked and beaten up in her own home, allegedly by a man who had been released from detention by the Albanese government.
Belting me, which went on for a good half an hour. I felt like I should have been dead.
The man was one of the 154 immigration detainees released into the community in November last year by the hopeless Albanese government. He and another man allegedly stole gold jewellery and other items worth more than $200,000, which the Simonses said constituted their life savings. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill and Immigration Minister Andrew Giles, two of the biggest clowns in the Albanese government, who ultimately bear responsibility, along with Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, for the release of all those detainees, immediately pulled off an amazing vanishing trick and disappeared into thin air. But as the Australian newspaper reported yesterday, Immigration Minister Andrew Giles has now conceded that his own delegates signed off on the removal of an ankle bracelet from the former detainee accused of bashing the Perth grandmother, undermining Anthony Albanese's attempts to blame an independent board for the growing scandal. Pauline Hanson took to social media saying about this incident, quote, "This has all occurred under the watch of the Albanese Labor government. Immigration Minister Andrew Giles, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill and Attorney General Mark Dreyfus should all be sacked, and Anthony Albanese should resign. If they refuse to take responsibility, then it will be up to the people of Australia to hold them accountable at the ballot box." Meanwhile, as Australians reeled in horror at what the Albanese government has done to this country, and in particular, what its actions may have done to that poor grandmother, up popped Tanya Plibersek, yay, like a nanny state jack-in-the-box.
We don't need to see violent crimes online.
Actually, Tanya, we do need to see violent crimes online so that everyone knows what is going on in this country under the woeful government that you are a key part of. It is only gratuitous violence that we don't need our children to see. That is a very, very big difference. But of course, this government is desperate to censor anything and everything that shines an unsavoury spotlight on their incompetence their mismanagement, their idiocy, and any imagery which may offend their precious favourite Western suburbs constituencies. Meanwhile, Albanese posted this ridiculous video on his own Twitter feed as he headed off to Alice Springs to listen.
Here, essentially, to listen. See what more we can do to make a difference.
To listen, to see what we can do to make a difference. That's it. No details, no plan, just listen in order to see what we can do to make a difference. That's the full Labor approach to hands-on government right there, clueless. Oh, and then to round out a full-blown week of clownish activity, we had that computing and quantum physics magician, Ed Husick, quantum-splaining how $1 billion of your money will magically do what all the great minds of Silicon Valley have thus far failed to do.
I mean, what quantum computing will do is it will unleash phenomenal processing power to be able to sort some of those issues that you just can't be able to sort through with current computing power.
Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for another week at the Albozo Canberra Clown Show, where billions of dollars of your tax money really can make other people's dreams come true. What would Hall & Oates say?
Oh yeah, where were you? You make my dreams come true.
You're watching outside. There's plenty of lefty lunacy going around. We mentioned last week, Queers for Palestine is very different to Queers in Palestine. So here's the Queers for Palestine this week. Here's a strong supporter there with all the appropriate gear on the metro or the tube or whatever, or the subway, ready to support Palestine. Fantastic. Now let's go to Palestine, where we actually see, as we mentioned last week, poor young man who was beheaded for being gay, Abu Maria, there he is, beheaded in the West Bank for simply being homosexual. And in case you think that that's a rarity, I'm afraid, have a listen to the head of Hezbollah telling us what he thinks about gays.
أما في حالة اللواط فما في فرق بين عزابي ومتزوج. في حالة اللواط من المرة الأولى حتى لو كان عزابي يقتل.
Rita, what do you do? I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Listen to this.
It's not. It's.
Listen to this girl. I think it was on the Don Lemon show. Have a listen.
She's not a girl. She's like in her 40s.
Taylor, how do you reconcile the way marginalized groups, many of the people in these marginalized groups, obviously they are fighting for Palestine, right, for the Palestinians and for what's happening in Gaza. But yet in Gaza, they would not have any freedom. You know,
they don't have freedoms in Texas and Florida. Does that mean?
But they don't. But I understand that. But Taylor, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. If I go to Texas, they're not going to throw me off of a roof.
When far-left radical Don Lemon has to step in and be the voice of reason, you know you're completely bat-poop crazy. And that woman, I think she's Washington Post, Taylor, what rights do gays not have in Texas and Florida?
Exactly.
What, pray tell, rights do they not have? The only thing, restrictions there is you can't, like the NHS, give puberty blockers or perform irreversible surgeries on children in the name of the trans agenda, and you can't indoctrinate them in schools. I would have thought that would be a good thing.
It was extraordinary to be so dumb, James, as to be comparing Gaza and Texas. I mean, seriously.
Well, you can't be that dumb. It's deliberate.
Well, I don't know. I think you can be that dumb.
They can read. They're not and I think at some point we've got to acknowledge they know precisely what they're doing. Most of this is dishonesty, not stupidity.
Okay. Well, speaking of honesty versus stupidity, Mark Speakman, the New South Wales Liberal leader, popped up this week on Q&A, and Chris Bowen got very excited and retweeted this out for the benefit of us all. Have a listen to Mr. Speakman.
Most experts will say that it's at least 15 or 20 years before you could get a nuclear facility up and running in Australia. We can't wait for nuclear, so in the meantime, here in New South Wales, we should be going ahead with our electricity roadmap, which will have heavy reliance on renewables.
Heavy reliance?
What are you doing, Liberal Party? What are you doing? Rita, help me.
Heavy reliance on renewables, yes. But his people are very keen to let us know that earlier in the program, he did say that he supports the lift on the ban on nuclear. So he wants the ban lifted. So good on you, but you just also completely undermine Peter Dutton's nuclear strategy.
James, I'll bet Speakman anything he wants that if you lift the ban tomorrow, we will have nuclear power a lot quicker than 15 or 20 years. What do you say?
Mark Speakman has learned well how to speak to a Q&A audience. He just hasn't learned how to speak to a Conservative audience, which is a problem since he's the New South Wales Conservative
Well, you know,
leader.
it seems to be a competition between the state Liberal leaders. I think they're all trying to outdo John Pesutto down in Victoria, who's uniquely hopeless and unelectable. And I think they're all looking at him and going, can we be more unelectable than John Pesutto? And some of them are actually giving him a run for his money.
Oh, dear. What do you say? Libs, come on, get your act together, please. Anyway, Billboard Chris was on the show last week and he popped up in Sydney as well during the week. Have a look. Here he is.
So we've just had people ring up concerned about what's going on, so we'll have a quick chat to you.
Yeah.
So what's happening here today?
I'm just having conversations. Yeah, I just stand quietly.
Yep.
And I've been doing this for almost 4 years.
Yep.
And if people want to have a chat, I have a chat.
Okay. Are you live streaming at the moment? Is that what
No.
you're doing? No? Okay. Have you put in a Schedule 1 under the Summary Offences Act to extend it here? Like, essentially, it could be considered a public assembly. Have you lodged any paperwork?
This isn't a public assembly, it's just me.
I'm just asking the question, have you lodged any paperwork? If
Are
haven't,
you
it's not a
telling me
problem.
that one person standing on the street is a public assembly?
I'm just asking you a question. If you answer the question, then move on and we'll explain.
New South Wales Police, you don't get the best. There are some wonderful New South Wales police officers out there, but alas, that ain't one of them, Rita.
Well, you know what? We've seen them be very tolerant towards some very aggressive, ugly behaviour from protesters on a weekly basis. But this poor bloke turns up with a sandwich board sign, and some woman in a bar calls the cops, and they're right over there demanding
Well, at
for
least he
once.
wasn't dressed as a cat or pretending to be a cat, which apparently there is an Adelaide police officer who is a furry, whatever that is. Anyway, we'll find out next week.
Is he looking for the perfect crime,
Oh,
Rowan?
nice one.
I'm
Thank you,
sorry.
James. Thank you,
I'm
Rita.
sorry.
Thank you for watching Outsiders, and we'll see you next Sunday.